My name is David Ledesma, and it's my great pleasure to invite Terry Newendorp to talk to us today here at the LNGgc conference in London. Terry's CEO of Taylor Dion. And just tell me, at the conference, do you think there's any kind of critical financing messages coming out from this LNG conference?
Well, I think that's right. We're talking about massive capital expenditures. People are talking about adding 150 million tons per year of capacity in the market in some very interesting and some very frontier countries that haven't attracted capital before. And we're talking massive amounts of money.
What type of money are we talking about?
Well, I mean, it's quite normal now for us to see project costs 20, 30, in the cases of $40 billion per project. And if we're talking about one of those projects being 10 million tons, we can see some extraordinary capital costs requirements, and the funding of those costs can't always come off the balance sheet. Depends upon who the sponsor is. Also the role of the government and whether it's required to or able to fund its proportion. And so project financing of some of these major projects is the logical way to go. But where that project financing is coming from is the big question.
But tell me, is there enough, we're talking about huge money, billions and billions of dollars. Is there simply enough project finance capacity to absorb all that debt?
Well, not from the commercial banks, particularly the European commercial banks right now. It's very difficult for the banks. They're in a liquidity constraint. They've got new Tier 1 capital requirements under the bank regulations in Europe. And consequently, their lending capacity is constrained at precisely the time that capital costs are just soaring off the charts, particularly on a per ton of LNG production basis. So we're seeing export credit agencies once again becoming extremely important to the sourcing of the capital. They've been there before. The export credit agencies were absolutely crucial for some of the very first project financed LNG projects in Qatar, Oman, Trinidad. So it's not the first time they've been there, but the size of the tickets we're talking about these days is so big that you have to wonder if the Japanese, Koreans, U.S., Canadians, Chinese really can bear the brunt of that total project financing.
But that must mean that other sources of finance, obviously equity is being used by many developers in Australia. Will we see greater equity in future projects, or will we see maybe bond or other sources of finance coming in?
We're seeing an awful lot of equity, of course. Gorgon's being developed with equity, Wheatstone, a lot of the big projects with equity, and corporate borrowings, which go into the projects as equity. Project bonds is a really interesting question, and we saw it in the mid-90s with Rosgas Train 1 and 2, big Qatari LNG deal, big capital markets frenzy around that. Based upon Korean offtakes, so the bonds got an extremely high rating. We just haven't seen very much of that since then, but it's a logical place when the banks are constrained, when even official government agencies can't have sufficient balance sheet to finance every single one of these projects that are of interest to them, that the debt capital markets would be logical source for some of this capital.
Of course, you spend your day-to-day work not sitting at conferences, but actually advising clients on how to structure projects. So just for the people listening, what are the kind of key lessons, takeaways, do you think that they should have when they're structuring a project to maximize third-party debt?
Well, it's very interesting. We typically start with the sponsor objectives in terms of not only the level of their participation, but the level of their involvement all the way down the chain. Do they want to be selling their LNG FOB, in which case they need to start engaging buyers who have their own fleets? Do they really want to be selling all the way into the end market, or somewhere in between? And it's usually somewhere in between. There are only a few players that have their own fleets and their own regas terminals and the ability to participate. So what do they want to achieve? And then who would their counterparty be based upon what that objective is? Is their counterparty going to be a BG or a Shell or a BP who's buying at the output flange of, or is it going to be a Japanese utility who is bringing it all the way in, or Korean, or Chinese bringing it all the way into their, or European, of course, into their system? And that end user and their requirements form a really key component of your potential capital structuring, particularly if it's an Asian off-taker, because you have the ability then to utilize Asian banks, Asian export credit agencies, under their natural resource import programs to be able to fund these projects. And it's pretty nice if you can get Korea Exim to write a $2 billion check. It makes a big dent in your debt.
So structuring is key.
Structuring is absolutely key.
Well, thank you very much, Terry, for giving us your insights. Very kind of you.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
It's always good to see you, David. Thank you.